Hello and welcome to the Gooners pod. Mike, happy Monday.
Thank you. You've been looking forward to this one. I've been looking forward to this one. So let's get right into it. It's the latest in our kind of mini series called A Conversation With, where we talk with some very special guests rather than the normal numpties that we have on every couple of weeks. But so to recap, if you haven't been tuning into the Gooners podcast, just in the last 12 months, we've been graced by the presence of ex-Arsenal players like Alan Smith, Lee Dixon, Kevin Campbell, Perry Groves, Michael Thomas, and another kind of area of football that we love to get into and we love to chat with our commentators. And we've been blessed to have, just in the last 6 months, Ian Darke, Derek Ray, and today a man with an epic career, a man who's called some of the most important or memorable football matches of all time, including World Cups, including the final in 2014 and 18, World Cup finals, countless Manchester derbies, North London derbies, Champions League masterpieces, European finals, and who could forget that famous West Ham 3, Arsenal 3 matchup of March of 2021 that no one will ever forget. Warm welcome to the Gooners podcast for Peter Drury. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here, fellas. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, man, so are we. So, Peter, I'm going to switch around our normal order just a little bit. We normally start with kind of a biographical background, but we have to start with this because it's so fresh in our mind. Ended about 25 hours ago or so. Did you do anything interesting yesterday? I mean, leisurely day around the house?
It was a crazy game of football, wasn't it, Mike? And I have to say, for me, it was the last game at the end of what has been an absolutely manic month, where almost every day has been a game day, and I've been working from first thing in the morning to last thing at night, day after day after day. And I'll be honest with you, when I went to West Ham yesterday, my key thought was a nice quiet one, safe, get it through cleanly, and because I was running on empty, and so when the game developed the way it did, it was one of those where running on empty wasn't going to be good enough, and adrenaline had to kick in. And wow, I mean, fantastic football match, and you as fans would have found it so painful over the first half hour because West Ham were making Arsenal look a bit silly, and then the last hour, Arsenal. Let's face it, if they played for 10 more minutes, Arsenal probably would have won the game.
That's the feeling you got,
yeah. And it was so good, and not just because I'm talking to you guys, and obviously you have a heavy Arsenal inclination, but I do love it when Arsenal play like Arsenal should. To see them pass and move and produce smooth, progressive, pretty on the eye football. That's for me what that's what a vintage Arsenal team should be doing. And yesterday we just got a glimpse of proper Arsenal.
You think that most neutrals would love seeing that kind of football, but it's most neutrals except, I don't know, the FA, PGMOL, but we'll not get into that. And we're going to be on again at 10 o'clock UK time tonight with a different crew to talk about the game and kind of break it down bit by bit. But you're obviously having a special perspective from the gantry within the London Stadium, and one of these games where you were both, I guess, world commentary and here in the U.S., which is fantastic because so often we get one and everyone else gets another. And you just seemed as a neutral to just be. I mean, I wouldn't have known you were tired and ready for a nice quiet 0-0 going in, because you seem to be enjoying it a hell of a lot more than we were.
Because you couldn't help it, and that's the great thing, Mike. As a commentator, you don't dictate the football match; the football match dictates to you, and you can only reflect what you're given. And what we were given yesterday was a feast. It was a feast, and you're entitled to be one-eyed about it. Quite right too. That's what supporting a team's all about. I'm not allowed to be, and I have to say that for the first half hour, West Ham were terrific to watch. Mm-hmm. You were probably hiding behind the furniture, or watching it through your fingers. But
I was throwing the furniture, but
exactly, throwing bricks at the television. But it was, it was a compelling performance from West Ham. But one of the accusations that's been thrown at Arsenal in recent years is that they haven't got a backbone. They have, get in front of them and they're not going to come back at you. Well, Arteta has a bit of iron about him. You fell behind to Tottenham previous weekend and came from behind and won that. And that, of course, for you is the derby. West Ham is just a derby. You fell 3-0 behind at West Ham, which is a club traditionally, historically, Arsenal expects to beat. This was going to be a big story. This was going to be Arsenal fading away, and this was going to be a reversal of the historical norm, and it would have made big headlines. And Arsenal's response was absolutely fantastic. I didn't think Odegaard was good. Wow.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
So, Peter, just a background on me, like this match is huge for me because my dad is West Ham, played for them as a youth. My brother-in-law is West Ham. My best friend is West Ham, and I've got 2 little nephews that were claret and blue yesterday. And so during the match, when we're going 1-0, 2-0 down, I'm just sitting here thinking this is absolutely dramatic. And my dad kept going, it's not over. It's not over, right? And then when Lacazette got that goal back, the group text turned into, oh, shit, this is now it's going to happen, right? So you're working this match where you see it kicking off. I mean, obviously, like a London derby's got to be fun for you, but like, how do you reflect on the game during it, after it? I mean, do you love these matches as much as anything? You don't want to get super overcommitted in the moment, but like, do you just kind of let it free flow? Because you get so energetic and passionate during these games. Like, you embody like the actual supporters, right? But you're great at not seemingly saying like, oh, I'm just going to support one team here. You get so excited for everything. So how do you take on a match like that? Is it fun for you? And
yeah, it's honestly, those are the best, Andy. Those are the best because you spend hours beforehand preparing all the facts and figures and biographical information and history of the game and blah, 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 blah. And then you get into a game like that and you can rip it all up because, those are the best game. The best games are the ones where you barely have to look at your notes because
Sure.
the action tells the story, and it just becomes instinctive. There's nothing, in a sense, you didn't need a commentator because the action tells its own, as I say, it tells its own story, and all you can do is reflect that. And you're talking about your family and your friends and thinking at 3-0, is it over? Is it over? And I have to say, and I'm not being clever after the event, there was always at 3-0, even then for me as a complete neutral, as a thought, if Arsenal score next, this is not done yet. And that's how it transpired. It might easily not have done, even at 3-1, 3-2, didn't they? West Ham had a big chance. Well, Antonio hits the post.
Antonio hitting the post.
An inch out,
That's when I knew that something was on because I'm like, if we're getting that kind of luck, then we really need to go down and finish this off.
Exactly so. And so yeah, when you're calling it and it's that exciting and you can just ride the wave. That's absolutely fantastic. That's how we would always want it, because it doesn't really need any thinking about. It does your work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, walk us through. So you do this build up, right? And obviously, like you said, the notes go out the window. But when you what does your day start like when you arrive to the stadium? Are there pre-match interviews? Do you go straight to your booth and prepare? Like, can you kind of walk us through what your day looks like prior to kickoff?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the bulk of the preparation is another day. Normally the day before, if that's a match day, you plan your week accordingly. But there's something like 6 or 8 hours at the desk to prepare the game. So let's leave that aside, and we wake up on the day of the game. Mm-hmm. Obviously, things are different at the moment in the COVID age. So yesterday I parked up about 3 hours before the game. And because under normal circumstances, I'd go and meet colleagues in the television compound or in the media area, and we eat sandwiches and drink tea and whatever. But that can't happen at the moment. So all you can do is walk into an empty stadium and go and sit in your seat, basically, and wait for the thing to begin. Which
I know one thing you did before the game yesterday while sitting in the gantry. I heard you did a podcast with some folks yesterday from the gantry at London Stadium. So are we jealous? No. But I will say, since this is going so swimmingly, that the next pod that we have you on, which we hope will be soon. Will be during the second half of the Arsenal game that you're calling. We'll try to keep our voices down. We'll just maybe make some suggestions, because you'll need it. But yeah, so we have to top that. We're the day after, but
I think what we need to do, Mike, is we get so many we've got Peter on, we've had Ian Dark, we get Lee Dixon. So people who are actually, actively in this world, maybe we just need to get them to drop certain lines into a match. And then, whoever can get the most throughout a season will donate to a charity. But Peter, I did want to ask you,
would do that for you, Andy, wouldn't he? Lee Dixon, talk about Arsenal legends and Snodger Smith.
We've been asking him to plug us on the air for a long time, and he's he's got this professional streak in him that won't let him do that. But.
That's so good guys.
My brother-in-law said something to me yesterday. He said it before, but yesterday's match, and you've been to the Olympic Stadium with supporters, right?
Yeah.
And he said if there were supporters in that stadium at 3-2, West Ham would have lost 5-3, because he said the supporters would have gotten so on the back of the players that they would have just. And do you see that as a commentator, where maybe we're seeing this West Ham growth because there aren't supporters there to get on them? Because he's we could be up 5-0 and they score one goal and everyone's like, here we go. And the players feed off of that.
What I would say, West Ham's a very special case because they're in that big Olympic stadium. And you guys, I'm sure, will know the narrative. West Ham used to play at Upton Park, which was a growling, old-fashioned fans right on top of your stadium. They moved out. Forget all the arguments. It's boring. But clearly, a lot of their consistent core punters down the years weren't happy because they were moving into this great big Olympic Stadium,
which I've been to as a neutral, and it's awful. It's awful.
Well, yeah. Well, as a fan experience, not great. As it happens, when West Ham started to do well or better, they started to learn how to generate a decent atmosphere. But there's been a degree of disgruntlement around West Ham, and of course this season now they're doing well. The fans aren't in, which is a real shame because they really could have started to generate something really good. So what I would say to you, given that the West Ham crowd can be moody and either way, you're quite right to say at 3-2, if West Ham's grumpy fans had been in, Arsenal could have gone on to win 6-3. Having said that, if those fans had been in at 3-0, West Ham could have gone on to get 6 because they would have been flying along and riding their wave. So it kind of cuts both ways. But it's not an issue at the moment because every ground is empty and soulless, but it certainly is an ongoing issue for West Ham, how they make themselves feel at home in that great big bowl.
Well, and from everything I'm hearing, it should be semi-resolved with the beginning of fans coming back before the end of this season. So so hopefully we'll be able to do that and have it stick as opposed to what happened earlier this season. Honest thoughts, Peter, on Mikel Arteta. He's now, he's had the reins of this team now for almost 15 months. And, I don't know if you realize this, but Arsenal supporters who normally we all just get along and agree on everything perfectly. There's no arguments amongst supporters, but we're a bit split about him at the moment. So what are you thinking of his first time?
I think he's young. And this is his first big gig on his own. B, he has learnt at the knee of Pep Guardiola. That's got to be not a bad thing. C, he has Arsenal in his blood. And D, the project began from a pretty low base in Arsenal terms. Arsenal is one of our great football clubs. And for a year or two now, it hasn't been great. So it's a tough gig. And it's a very famous club. But what I see in him is a bit of steel. I like that he left out Aubameyang the other week. That was brave. That was brave. And now, as Arsenal fans, if you'd lost that game, he got lucky in the sense that they won without him.
But that move was more George Graham than Arsene Wenger, and I think people have been waiting to see a little bit less Arsene in Mikel Arteta and a little bit more George, to be honest with you.
Maybe so. Listen, I I'm not an Arsenal fan. It's absolutely more for you to say than it is for me. My opinion is neither here nor there. But if I were if he were in charge of my club, I'd be happy. You know, I think most other fans would say Arteta. I like the cut of his jib. I like the look of him. I like the way he's managing players. I like the way he's obviously the boss, but actually his relative youth is a good thing because players, I think, still identify with him. There are players playing who can probably remember him playing. One or two might even have played against him. And it's just he looks to me like a guy who sets an example, sets a standard. And Arsenal, in a very, very competitive league and in a very competitive continent, have a way to drag themselves back up to the greatness that they feel they ought to have. And I think you could do a lot worse than him. I really, really do. I think it's an inspired appointment.
I do too.
I hope it works.
Yeah, and then I think like for Arsenal supporters, at the time he was kind of taking over Arsenal, I think Jose was going to Tottenham and Ancelotti was going to Everton, and a lot of Arsenal supporters were saying this club needs one of those two. And in hindsight, it looks like we may have gotten the better end of the deal with Everton falling off and Jose being Jose and the shambles that come around that. But Peter, Mike and I were talking before you joined us, and I said to him, like, for me, a lot of supporters are on the back of Arteta because we're not seeing consistent performances. You study the game more analytically than probably most of us as supporters. These players have done this now under Arsene, Freddie, Unai, and Mikel. So at what point do you think it might be the players versus the manager? Because I've seen the inconsistency across 5 seasons and 4 managers now. And the majority of the players are very much the same, bar a handful.
You see, the trouble there, Andy, is that you've identified 4 different coaches. And every coach in turn believes, even Arsene Wenger, even the great Arsene Wenger, give me 1 more year and it'll all be fine. Give me 1 more year and it'll all be fine. Give me one, Unai Emery. You talk about the interesting conversation around the coach you eventually did appoint. And you got the sort of non-established one, the kind of starter, new, thrusting young thing. Unai Emery was an established, successful, top European coach. And he didn't cut the mustard for Arsenal fans or for Arsenal. He didn't win enough football matches. So there comes a point, and this is why I like the Arteta appointment. There comes a point where you have to say, okay, guys, line in the sand. Let's pretend history starts today. This is where it begins. So instead of getting someone with a history of their own, with a monstrous CV, why not appoint someone who we think we can believe in, who understands our club, and today is day one. And I sort of feel that that's what they've done with Arteta. And I hope that if Arsenal do finish 10th this year, I've got a funny little feeling they might squeak up to sort of 6th, 7th, 8th, and maybe even squeak into Europe. I just feel it's going in the right direction. But if they do finish 10th this year and win nothing else, I really hope they stick with him. I would only start judging him next year. Let's face it, there was an FA Cup final last year, and and that's pretty good. That is pretty good.
Yeah, we use those like cup holders around the Emirates now these days, apparently. So they're not really that important.
Well, they sustained Arsenal for a while, didn't they?
They certainly did, for better or for worse, depending on how you look at it. They sure did.
Yeah.
Do you have well, we did talk about this beforehand, but for the air, we were wondering, and I know we've gotten the question from Becca in the chat about if you have a team that you support professionally, of course.
But
I know it is an Arsenal. But
Mike, I always preface the answer to this question just because I have to.
You have to
with an assurance to anybody who's listening that every commentator has a team, because they just do. You grow up loving the game, don't you? And so anyone who denies that is telling you a lie. But B, I promise you that when you go and work on a game, you're working on the game. And so if you perceive bias from any commentator, it's just not there. It's not, because you watch as a fan with your heart and you watch as a commentator with your head. And that is simply the case. And that you really can categorize.
Sorry. The views from this podcast are not necessarily that of the guests. It's just
yeah, well, there you are. Anyway, so yeah, the team that I have been following through my adult life is Watford. Funnily enough, they weren't the team I grew up with, and that might sound very inauthentic, but I moved into the local area just as my first son, now 27 years old, was being born. And when he was 5 or 6 years old and starting to love the game and talking about Manchester United and Liverpool and all of that, I said, listen, what we will do is we'll go to the local club. And so he now drives all over the land when he can, home and away. I've got 3 sons, and my wife goes to Watford. And, you know, our family WhatsApp group through the growing up of my boys has been not about, have you done your French homework yet? And, you know, how did you get on at school today? But who's fit for Tuesday night's game against Rotherham? You know, so Watford has been a lot of fun in our lives because they're a harmless club. As you know, they're not a big club. They train absolutely over the hedge from Arsenal. The training ground is right next door to Arsenal's. You know, we've always joked that could we borrow a few players, please? But it's a lovely club to support. We've just had 5 years in the Premier League, and it was terrific because we beat, at least once, we beat all the big boys, you know, apart from Manchester City, because nobody beats them. But, you know, we had our days against Arsenal. We had our days against Manchester United. We even beat Liverpool 3-0 the year they won the league, and we went down. So we've had some happy days. We know who we are. And so that's my Watford.
And honestly,
we owe you for the invincible. We owe them for keeping us invincible.
Correct.
And one of the greatest finishes to a football game of all time. One of them against Brighton in the promotion playoffs. Was that Brighton that they were playing against? Leicester. Yeah. I think Brighton because it was knockout, but he was playing for Leicester at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, Bill Leslie's call on that is fantastic, but I can only imagine what would have been going on coming out of your mouth at that moment.
Well, I'll tell you, it was a funny day that night because I was working at Old Trafford that day, and whilst Watford fans remember that Troy Deeney day, you know, as the moment of that, the historic moment of that football day. Actually, it was also Sir Alex Ferguson's last home game as manager of Manchester United, and I was up there in the media suite at Old Trafford, and all of the top writers from Britain and around the world were there, you know, waiting to write their sort of obituaries of Alex Ferguson's career. And the rain was falling and they were playing Swansea. And I was there trying to think of what I would say as he came onto the pitch at the end of the game and blah, blah, blah. And up in the corner, there was obviously a screen on, and nobody else gave a damn about what was happening to Watford, you know. And I looked up, and this penalty was given, and oh no! And everybody, what? Well, anyway, I exploded, and I lost all my professionalism in that moment.
It's the best moment of Manuel Almunia's career.
Almunia, yeah, you see,
yeah, what
a good spot. Yeah, Manuel Almunia, absolute legend. It was good when he moved to a bigger club, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. or maybe he just found his level.
Sticking with Watford and keepers. I'm a big cyclist, and so when I ride indoors, I need to keep myself entertained. Do you follow Ben Foster's YouTube channel?
I've seen bits of it. I'm not a big social media man, Andy, to be honest. But he's crazy.
If you're a Watford supporter, he does so many cool behind-the-scene features where he'll wear like a GoPro. I think any football fan would enjoy it because he wears a GoPro into meetings after they've lost, after they've won. You get to see the interactions with the coaches, and like you do get to see a different side. And I don't know why Watford are letting him do this because you hear some pretty intriguing things, but they must do because he gets millions of views. But he wore the GoPro when they were traveling up to like Sunderland, or they were going on an away match somewhere for a cup tie, and like it's just really, really interesting. And so as a supporter of Watford, like you just get to see that behind the scenes, which is pretty neat. And he's just so honest, you know, and like I think they put a GoPro camera on the goalpost in a match, and you can hear him being just on his own ass. It's so interesting.
No, he's a funny guy. And of course, he's reached the stage of his career where he can be like that. You couldn't do that if you were 23. You know, he can do. He's like the guy who's leaving school tomorrow. You know, the teachers can't stop him anymore. You know, and so and nobody minds because he's not doing any harm anyway. He's a really good example. he's up for the game. He performs properly, and so that's good. I'll tell you a quick story. Talking of goalkeepers in Arsenal and Watford, way back when Watford had 1 year in the Premier League in the 2006 or whatever, and my kids were small, and Watford played Arsenal on Boxing Day and lost at home. But Jens Lehmann was in goal for Arsenal at the time, and we were sat in the stand, and my littlest one was only 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, and he was sat on his mum's knee, and Jens Lehmann came out and did one of his monstrous big clearances, and it bounced up and it hit the ball from Jens Lehmann's clearance, hit my wife in the eye. And she couldn't get her hands because she was holding our little boy. And she wears contact lenses, and it really hurt. And for a moment, it wasn't funny. It was no harm done, but for a moment, it wasn't funny. Anyway, I got in touch with one of the guys I know in the Arsenal media department and told him this story. And Jens Lehmann wrote my wife a lovely card to say sorry and sorry for kicking the ball. Yeah, so there you are.
I thought you were going to say the Drury family got to witness Jens Lehmann go behind the goal and take a cheeky piss or something like that, which he's also been known to do every once in a while. But I like your story better. So enough about yesterday. This is where it gets a little fanboyish for me. But I have to tell you, one of the things that has really kept my 33-year-long love affair with English football going is that. Especially when results aren't up to par and being thousands of miles away, the action is the poetic nature of football commentary. It just really is. And when I moved to London as a teenager, Andy, what year was that? Do you remember? Have I ever mentioned?
You like to mention it was around 89.
No, it was around 89. It was 88 actually, Andy. But
in time for 89.
Yes, good time for that. I immediately fell in love with the passion and the atmosphere at the games. I mean, I stumbled onto the North Bank terraces, made it my second home, loved the experience. But, that was 2 or 3 hours every couple of weeks. And so I watched a lot of football on television and also fell in love with the way that the English language that I thought that I knew growing up in America was used in such a spontaneous and like intentional way to add theater and emotion and drama to basically what is another kind of a performance, like a football match. So, I'm sure that I'm not going to be the first person to laud you for your poetic style, but I do want to, let you know that as from being far away and as disconnected as we are, which is less so than it used to be in the past. I mean, it's just ingrained in the memory of an experience of watching the beautiful game that you and those who emulate or even come close to you truly are. So, I mean, no one will forget where they were watching Wayne Rooney's ridiculous overhead kick in the Manchester Derby in 2011. I mean, I couldn't hate more both teams, but I remember where I was, what I was doing when that happened. But the call, do you remember the call? Obviously, I mean,
roughly, yeah, roughly.
What? Yeah. I know you don't. I know you don't like to go back and do that, so I'll do it for you. What a goal! What a time! And what a place! What a player! It just framed that moment in the perfect perspective. If you were a casual watcher of that game, you set the scene for how truly important it was and vital, and how contextual that goal was. And even if you're an avid and plugged in watcher and you knew all that already, it's like having whipped cream on the top of your dessert. So it makes me wonder, as I get something that should never happen to somebody who's on microphone, a frog in their throat, who were your inspirations in broadcasting growing up, in life in general, that kind of led you to your unique approach to calling calling things the way that you do? Is it intentional, or does it just flow out of your body?
Certainly, Mike. First of all, thank you. That's a lovely thing that you've just said about me, and I do appreciate that. I have never set out to do things in any particular way. It's just kind of me, I suppose, for better or worse. And I'm lucky because I do love language, I do love words, and I do love football. And therefore, I'm very, very lucky guy that I'm in a job that enables me to indulge those kind of twin passions. I think all I hope to be is kind of honest and authentic, really. I think if you try to pretend to be someone else, you're going to crash and burn. My broadcasting hero probably growing up was a guy that very possibly you haven't heard of, but who was iconic on BBC Radio in my younger days, a guy called Peter Jones. who was a Welsh radio commentator, whose command of the English language was absolutely magnificent, and whose voice was to use your expression, cream. You know, it was just a beautiful thing to hear, and who just brought sport to life. And you know, in an age before everything was on television and we relied a lot more on the radio, you know, I used to go to bed and smuggle my little transistor radio under the pillow to listen to the football when I wasn't supposed to be, and you know, he was a great broadcaster. Of course, there've been many, and I've been very lucky in my career that the kind of generation before me have helped me out enormously. A guy I'm sure you will have heard of called Barry Davis, who for many years was one of the great voices of BBC television sport. You know, he's been a great supporter of mine, and he was brilliant with words. And what he did very, very well was know when to use them and when not to use them. He was a great user of silence, which is a skill I think fading out a bit, for better or worse. Again, maybe, you know, there's a great argument around that, you know,
especially without crowds in this. And I would imagine that's actually an adjustment to make when you know, you're sometimes just listening to the crowd go crazy is a good 10 or 15 seconds, and it isn't lazy by any means. It's exactly what's needed.
Well, it's 100%, and actually one of the difficulties, Mike, around doing a commentary for the world is that, you know, that in different regions there are probably different tastes there. You know, there is certainly a big English constituency that likes a bit of silence. And you guys, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think broadly speaking, the American sports audience likes an ongoing, And so sometimes when I leave it to breathe, as we say in England, I'm thinking, what are the Americans are thinking? I'll put the microphone down here. You know, so right. It's a difficult balance to strike.
Well, sometimes it ends up coming off. Go ahead.
Sorry, but go ahead. Oh, no, I was going to ask, how often are you recognized in public for your voice? Because we've heard a couple times, like Alan Smith, who comes on, you know, a couple times a year with us, will say, yeah, he was telling us a story how he was in Italy having dinner, and these young boys like heard his voice from FIFA. Do you get that a lot, where people are like, "Why do I know your voice?" Or like, you know, because you've got
Alexander Kalipov's calling you a Pro Evolution legend.
Yeah, right. Like, do you get that often?
I wouldn't say often, but yes, it does happen. It does happen from time to time. You can just be talking, and somebody says, "I think I know you." Which is a weird thing, because actually one of the great television presenters in this country of the last generation, a guy called Des Lynam, who you might or might not have heard of, a very, very famous presenter here. He once said to me when I was just breaking into television, he said, "You are so fortunate. You've got the perfect job, because you get the thrill of live broadcast, you get the thrill of live sport, but you can walk into the supermarket and nobody knows who you are." And that is absolutely true, and I love that, because if there's one thing that my least favorite part of the role I have is the extent to which people do know me. I really don't enjoy being well known, really. If I could do what I do in private, which I know is kind of counterintuitive.
This is the perfect podcast for you then, Peter.
Because Peter, I'm with you. Like Mike and I, like I've gone into pubs. I was down in Austin for a friend's bachelor party last year, and someone recognized me from the pod, and I was so embarrassed. But if I go into a pub with Mike and they know, I'm like, he loves the attention and so I just sit off and I'm like, I'll let him take all the.
I'm not even lying and I think I told you about this, Andy, when our mutual friends Tom and Joey and I were in Lisbon together at the airport on the way back, somebody recognized me by my voice. They are blind. They had never watched the podcast before. But he's like, "Are you the guy from the podcast?" And I mean, that was just random, because I'm going out to, you know, less people than you are every week, but it is funny though. But yeah, I do kind of get a kick out of that. It's but it doesn't happen that often.
No, so, I like to hide, Mike, if I can.
Hey, you know, it's believe me, in this day and age, you'd rather be anonymous than infamous. Yeah. I guarantee you that. I don't want to sound snobby or apologetic for being American, because I'm not. I'm happy to be, but the NBC Sports really did get it right with their coverage of the Premier League, because as opposed to predecessors, with that contract, they have completely respected the authenticity of the game with authenticity in broadcasting. I mean, it makes a huge difference as a consumer to me. And I'm not going to bring up his name, but years ago, Fox had the Champions League coverage before, I think, CBS, or maybe even before that. And they put a person who is a sublime announcer for American football and basketball, and they put him in the forefront on, I'm sure the chat will mention his name, but I'm not going to, because I love the guy as an announcer, but it was just such a mismatch for the game. He brought zero authenticity. He brought energy, but the energy wasn't well placed, and I couldn't watch the game. So the authenticity is much appreciated. I'm glad NBC Sports have gotten that from the beginning.
Yeah. No, they did really well. I mean, I know all the guys. I see them on a weekly basis. They're a really good bunch of fellas. You obviously you have Lee Dixon on, who's a big part of it. Arlo's a good lad.
Andy loves him.
I know you can't you can't say the same about Graham Rousseau because he played for Chelsea, but he's
you know what though,
he's like a great lad too.
He's up there with like a Gary Neville and Phil Neville, where you hated them as players, but you hear them on TV and you're like, they know what they're talking about, and he's just one of those where, and what I like about, he's a little bit too Chelsea heavy, like where I think Lee does a great job, because we've asked Lee before, like, hey, how do you commentate on Arsenal being an ex-player?
People call him out for being too negative about
Arsenal. And he said, I feel like I'm too honest.
Yeah, Alan Smith gets that as well, and I just don't see any other commentators or pundits that that played for teams that wear those teams on their sleeve that aren't.
I think the problem they have is that they both played for a great Arsenal team, and so it's possible that when they're looking at their beloved Arsenal and it's not as good as they think it should be, they find it. Listen, I'm not far be it from me to talk for them. They might give you a completely different explanation.
I think it's a great point.
It's a theory, maybe. Yeah.
So
we love Lee. He comes on a lot, and we had him on a couple of weeks ago, and it was just nice to have a chat with him as like a supporter, where what did he say, Mike? He'd never lay down behind the wall.
Yeah.
It was just funny hearing his.
Like, I would not be one of those. He's like, A, it doesn't work. B, you're not getting me to do that. But yeah, we had him on like minutes after the end of the Arsenal Wolves game, which was probably the other ridiculously manic and very upsetting game of the season for us. But anyway, you're also the inspiration behind two traditions on this podcast. One of them has been going on for years, and that's the infamous Gooners Pod bell. We have a bell that we ring every time someone on the show uses one of those typically English poetic football phrases, whether it's sixes or sevens or, just things you would never hear just walking around in America. It gets an honorary ringing of the bell, and Andy can't stand it. But, at this point, people tune in the podcast just for the bell more than Andy and myself combined. So it kind of, it goes. I know that's probably going on your CV, but
Thank you.
That's
I'll take that.
And we've turned it into actually a sideshow, which we do every year, which is called the FA Cup of Football Phrases. We just did the last one 2 weeks ago, and it's a knockout competition, not a knockout competition, but a knockout competition of football phrases, put up against each other, and we get a guest panel on to choose. Do we like I can't even think of any of them all of a sudden now, but sixes and sevens, diabolical, just
in
things
the
you only ever hear about football. Yeah, in the ascendancy is one of my
nice,
favorite.
Do you know what though? What do they say about Americans and English? That we're We're divided by our common language.
Yeah, exactly. And I just love it. I mean, again, my love for it comes from a very impressionable time in my life, living over there and hearing it and loving how different it was and wanting that back. But we can't all be 15 and 16 years anymore. So we exchanged some emails before going on the podcast. You mentioned that you're not a big social media guy. Peter, congratulations, because saying I don't fancy going on Twitter should be as normal and reasonable as saying I don't fancy visiting crack houses. But for some reason, I can't escape it. So bravo to you. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because, are you aware of how many tribute accounts there are on Twitter? People either claiming to be or admitting that they're not, but basically tweeting Peter Drury tribute accounts on Twitter, on social media. I mean, are you aware of them?
Well, I am aware that they exist. Yeah, I am. Again, for better
Do
or
they
worse.
scare you at some time?
I don't know whether to be scared, flattered, frightened, or just
I'd say all the
confused,
above.
bewildered. All of the above. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
the answer is yes.
It's just, and that partly plays into the ever intensifying certainty in my head that I'm not going there, because I just think it's.
Did you sample it in
madness.
2013? Because there's an account that almost seems plausible that it might have been you, but it's been dormant
Never.
since 2000. So that's not even you.
I've never even been close. No.
Just on Twitter alone, there's Poetic Peter, there's Quotes Drury, there's Peter Drury football poet, there's Peter Drury Stan, which is what the kids are now talking about when they're like a stalker fan of somebody. The real Peter Drury, which is not the real Peter Drury. There's Naughty Peter Drury. Which is like poetic uses of like, I guess, like 50 Shades of Grey or something like that. But I, don't want to scare you, but they're out there.
I'm scared.
But so
I'm scared.
Let's move the conversation then into the part that I'm really looking forward to. A few of your hundreds of special moments, and I've missed one, and it's already been called out in the chat. The call at the Bernabeu.
That was our intro for this podcast, Mike, for about 2 years. So Peter, sorry if there's an infringement thing here, but we had you, we had your leading call into like us in, and it's my all-time favorite Arsenal goal ever, and it's because of your voice and obviously the actions of Henry.
I would think, Andy, I thought Thierry Henry has something to do with it, doesn't he?
It's a combination of both. It's just the sublime.
It's Drury, Henry, Senderos, of all the people that were involved that day, those were the top three. So,
but we probably had that voice for three. We probably had that for 3 seasons, didn't we? Until we paid millions of dollars for that amazing intro that we have now.
Yes, and it was $1 million per minute, so it was only $500,000 that we actually paid. But yeah, I think we did that until we started doing YouTube pods. But the first there's 3 specific games I want to bring up. First, 12th of May, 2012, Manchester City 3, QPR 2. We all remember the observed drama, unless you were like a fetus at the time. But strangely, both yourself and Martin Tyler are both widely associated with that call. Martin Tyler, I think, was on the broadcast here, and I guess you were in England. I mean, do you know how that worked?
Martin did the English one. Martin was on Sky in the UK, and I was doing the world.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure we here got Martin Tyler.
I think you might even have got Ian Darke on ESPN.
Well, I think it's Martin Tyler because he did a bit of a different Aguero at the end, which is the one that we got, and you did.
Well, you might have got that eventually, but I can assure he was on Sky in the UK. Yeah,
you might be right. You might. I mean, that was what I was wondering because I mean, two incredible commentators on the same game. I guess that's not that uncommon, but I mean, you rightly sung in that moment's praise as being the most exciting end to a Premier League season. And I'm glad you put those 2 words in because you know what's coming next.
It's up for grabs now.
Yes. The 23 years before that, not the Premier League, but the old First Division, there's one that might kind of hold some water there. And I don't want to take anything away from the late, great Brian Moore, but I mean, you would have crushed that moment, would you not have?
Well, what I would say, Mike, is that I think he did actually. It was a different age,
and
it was of its time. It was a terrific piece of spontaneous commentary. It's up for grabs now, and it was a less hypey age, wasn't it? And we'd never had anything like it before. And I remember where I was that night. I'd recently graduated. My wife was in teacher training. And I'd gone to visit her for the weekend at her teacher training college, and I sat with all the others in some student room with beer, watching that Arsenal-Liverpool game. And wow! And you're right, by the way. I mean, clearly the Manchester City QPR thing was bananas because they were 3-2 down with 3 minutes to play, and
it's the seesaw situation in 2 different.
But it can't compete with the Arsenal-Liverpool because, very obviously, those were the 2 teams who could win the thing, playing. Mm-hmm. And Arsenal had to win by 2, and they were winning by 1. Liverpool were about to win the thing by a fraction, and then Arsenal won the thing by a fraction. And it doesn't get better than that.
You've gotten the question correct. Thank you. You've passed the test. We still love you. So the second one, April 2018, Stadio Olimpico in Rome. Roma 3, Barcelona 0. And if anyone doesn't remember this game, let's take a quick listen.
And they're Roma have risen from their ruins. Nonetheless, the Greek god in Rome, the unthinkable unfolds before our eyes. This was not meant to happen. This could not happen. This is happening. Barcelona extraordinarily 8 minutes from elimination. And Di Francesco does not know where to go. Iniesta does not know where to look. It is a Greek from Mount Olympus who has come to the 7 hills of Rome and pulled off a miracle.
I got to say, my computer froze up a little bit while that was going on. Was it that way for everybody or just for me?
No, I got the whole thing.
Good, because that would have absolutely destroyed me if the actual call, because I'm getting bits and pieces of it. But now I've read some comments that you gave about that, which I find fascinating about the prepper. Or actually, it was an interview with 90 minutes of your call. And I love the question of, did you plan that out in advance? Yeah. Did you plan a 66-1 long shot outcome and know who was going to score the final goal and that it was going to be a defender? I mean, would you rather have that call in your track record, or would you rather have put a $5 on that exact thing happening, given what the odds were?
Well, quite good. Absolutely good. I mean, Mike, thank you for saying that, because sometimes when I'm asked the question about were you prepared for it, I feel as though I come over overly defensively. I have no problem with preparing properly to commentate on a football match, but if you stop and think, it is preposterous to suggest that I sat in my hotel room the night before preparing for Manolas, who never scored a goal, to score the third and winning goal for Roma against. You just wouldn't waste your time on that. So it was one of those nights when my planets aligned, simple as that. And it, I got very, very lucky. I was very relaxed that night because it wasn't even the main game. Liverpool were playing Manchester City that night, and nobody was watching Roma Barcelona because it was done. And then, funnily enough, Liverpool stretched away from Manchester City. People turned over, and this crazy thing happened. And because I felt no pressure going into that game at all, because my audience at best was niche, I was very, very relaxed, and it just came out the way it came out. And that line, Roma have risen from their ruins, was a line that sort of blurted out because I wasn't quite sure who scored the goal, and I needed to cover for 3 or 4 seconds.
I was hoping you would say that, because I did read. I saw that in the interview that you bought some time to find out who scored the goal. When you found out it was him, did the Greek Roman? I mean, did that just was that just a light bulb that spontaneously goes off?
I think it must have been, to be honest. Manolas scores a goal. What do I know about Manolas? He's Greek. It's where are we? We're in Rome. What have Greece and Rome got in common? Mythology. And so you just but I can't say that was a conscious thought process, because clearly it was just a sort of stream of consciousness. And what I would say to anyone is, please don't think about it too deeply and try and break it down, because it's if you actually think about it and dig too deep, you might say it's nonsense. Manolas is not a Greek god, and he didn't come down from the 7 hills of Rome, or but whatever it was.
That's what an idiom or an analogy is, though. That's what's beautiful about it. Just time to call out some people in chat, because everyone's just gushing over that call. Don Juan's in the chat. Daniel Robert, Matt D'Souza, Drago, I think may have picked our pod out of the 2 that he was watching based on our guest today. So from the Highbury squad's in here. Gold, absolute commentary gold. Dubber Ducky says chills. Roma have Rise from the Ashes from Zamir Madhani, and Laurie Laker, just gushing as I am about you being his all-time favorite commentator. Sebastian Hunter, this guy's a legend. So I mean, you're clearly very, very well respected. And Arsenal-wise, before I get to the third game, because it's going to be close to the end, and if you've got any user questions that you want to ask of Peter, if you're in the chat, please put them in with the Q in front of them. Now would be the time. But Arsenal-wise, and we've talked about one, the Thierry Henry one. You've called a number of great Arsenal moments, and one of the most recent that I can think of, and it wasn't really like a huge moment, but it was somewhat touching, was from the North London Derby two years ago, March of 2019. Let's have a listen.
And one day, next autumn, when Aaron Ramsey wakes up in his bed in Turin and feels a little bit lonely in a foreign land, he will warm himself with the memory of having said, in a sense, goodbye to Arsenal with a goal against Spurs at Wembley.
Mm-hmm. That's a little tug at the heartstrings. I think we all loved Aaron Ramsey. Not all of us, loved the way it ended, but I mean, that's a pretty storybook ending. I mean, are you going into that? Again, it's not about preparation of the words you're saying, but are you going into that game with one of the things being, this is Aaron Ramsey's last one? What if he were to score a goal? What would I say? I mean, it not necessarily writing the words out as though you're scripting it, but is that a moment that you contemplated could happen because that was predictable rather than something like Manola's?
Sure. I think, obviously, you're aware of the narrative. I don't think I would have got into that game specifically with a line for if Ramsey scored the goal. In fact, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't. What I would say, and again, this is a strength and a weakness of mine, is that I'm a soppy so-and-so. I love the human story. And I sometimes think that all of us, like, I'm guilty sometimes myself, we think of these footballers as robots who just turn up and do it. And they're not robots. And however much they're paid, they are human beings, and they're frail and flawed and so on. And when there is a nice little human line to be attached to someone, I find myself quite attracted to it. It's amazing how often in the context of sport, and I from knowing you for an hour now, I suspect you two guys are the same. I find myself welling up. I find I find quite an emotional thing on a human level. I think what it is like. What it is like to be that bloke in that moment, and then you get a real feel for the kind of the profound humanity of sport. And for him in that moment, there must have been wow, I've just scored against Spurs. I can kind of leave now and it's all okay.
Do you think he's waking up in the morning in his bed in Turin and feeling homesick?
Maybe.
Frankly, the trophies are probably preventing that from happening too much.
Yeah.
I think
Juve aren't having their greatest season, actually. But
no, but I think, for a player of Aaron Ramsey's stature, specific to whatever club he's played for, right? When he looks back on his career, the goals he's going to remember are going to be Arsenal goals.
You would think so, yeah.
Yeah,
he scored so many,
as opposed to
so many big goals.
Cristiano Ronaldo.
Yeah. He scored so many big goals for us in cup finals against Tottenham. I mean, he loved a goal against Tottenham. It's just.
No, of course, those will keep him, as I said, keep him warm. I happen to think he's a very proud Welshman as well. A goal he scores for Wales really matters to him.
Oh, absolutely.
But a goal he scores for Arsenal certainly matters to him as well.
So there's one more game I want to cover. Peter, are we okay on time? I don't want to. I don't want to monopolize your evening, but this is just. I mean, this is such a pleasure. I don't want it to end. The last game, and perhaps my favorite of the lot, is the one that least people know about. More, I'd say, of everything we've talked about so far. It wasn't the biggest match, even though it was played at Wembley. It wasn't a World Cup or a European final or a Premier League or Champions League game, but rather a cup final in a competition where the best team permitted to even participate is the 93rd best team in English football pyramid. Do you know the game I'm referring to?
Is it Barrow?
Barrow and Stevenage, 2010, 8th of May, Wembley Stadium, the FA Trophy final, not the FA Cup, not the FA Vase, but the FA Trophy between Barrow and Stevenage, a game decided in the 107th minute, and one where if you tuned in without any context of where this game stood in the world order, magnitude in football, that you would have thought based on your commentary that it was the most important game in football. And that's exactly, it's not about the game being played, it's about the sport being played and what it means to people. And that was perfectly laid out. And the first goal had to be one you personally enjoyed. So let's have a watch.
Drury out by Edwards to Andy Drury again. Oh, what a goal! Goal of a lifetime for Drury at Wembley. He could play for any team, in any league, in any land in the world, and he would never strike a ball more purely than he has there. Andy Drury with only his 4th goal of this season. His last one in the trophy was in round 2 against Vauxhall Motors. Nothing he has done on a football field will have compared to that. He's out of a Kentish stable, began at Sittingbourne, played for Ebbsfleet, moved to Stevenage, and now in his 2nd successive Wembley final, he has pulled out a goal which he will frame and stick on the mantelpiece for life.
First of all, Andy Drury. Does he claim relation to you? Because that would be the more...
No, but it was, I have to admit, that was fun. It was fun that a guy called Drury scored a goal. It
out
really
of a
was.
Kentish stable. What does that mean, out of a Kentish stable? Like,
you can ring your bell with that one.
I'd love to hear that one.
It just means he was born and brought up in Kent.
Oh, I love it. That great goal. And my son was watching me edit that yesterday, and he's like, Andy Drury could have played for any team in the world. And I'm like, no, that's not what he means. He doesn't mean he was good enough to play for any team in the world. He means that anybody playing for any team in the world, any competition, would have been proud of a strike like that. It could not have been any better, no matter who you were. And he's like, oh, that makes more sense. And I mean, just fantastic. But that game was just beginning. So I'm going to take you to the second goal. I hope you don't mind us going through this way, but this is just. When you put this game in context of what it was to most people, other than maybe Barrow and Stevenage fans, it's what makes me love it so much. So here we go with the second goal.
Rutherford aimed it at McKinley. That's 1-1. The hordes from the north are jumping up and down at Wembley. They're not done yet. The Barrow boys are upsetting the apple cart.
First of all, that guy looks like
a big boy.
That guy looks like me while I was on my way to my current stature. But the Barrow, what is it? The hordes from the north. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know, but Barrow is a place right up in the northwest extreme of England. It's it's way millions of miles away from anywhere. It's almost an island. It's not. That's ridiculous. But it's so. I mean, listen. I appreciate. I live on a very small island. It's only a dot on the map, England. But within our dot, Barrow is a long way away from everywhere. And it was a lovely narrative that this town from millions of miles away was there, and practically the whole population of the town had come to Wembley.
Yeah, I mean, Wembley wasn't quite full, but you could tell that every Barrow supporter was probably there, because I've been to non-league football, and there's they count their crowds in the hundreds, not the thousands.
Yeah.
So when you see Wembley even half full for a cup final like that, that it's the fans, it's the city, it's everybody involved. So, and then speaking of Barrow having success, the final goal in the 107th minute of the game, this is what it's all about right here.
Becoming an epic final, this. Yeah. Rutherford, Walker. Oh yes! Barovian Bedlam. The local boy has done it.
What a strike, by the way. I mean, there's some
great
goals.
goals in that game, weren't there?
Jeez.
Yeah.
I mean, that header for the second one almost looks like pedestrian at this point compared to the other two. But
when you get assigned like a match of that stature comparative to like Roma versus Barcelona, is there like a moment in your mind where you're like, oh, so you're like, this is what's more exciting for you?
Much more. Well, not much more, just very different. I love it because the point is, Andy, well, first of all, you're dealing with real people. These are not superstars. And for those guys, and the reason I can get excited, again, it kind of goes back to that Aaron Ramsey thing. For those guys, think of them as human beings. This is the moment of their lives. Not just, they've crossed the white line at Wembley Stadium. They are playing there. Then to score a goal there, amazing. And that bloke who scored the winner for Barrow was born and bred in Barrow.
Yeah. He was Barovian.
Barovian, yeah. And he scores this goal. And the great thing in terms of sort of nuts and bolts about a commentator for a game like that is, if I'm doing Arsenal against Manchester United, truth be told, there's nothing I can tell you about Arsenal or Manchester United. You know it all. All I'm doing is saying the names over and over again. Yeah. And if I start giving you facts about, I know. With Barrow against Stevenage, you can really get your teeth into a project, find out about these people. And some of them were part-time. Well, maybe there might have been some part-time footballers in that game, who had jobs and who on the day before they'd been doing someone's plumbing, and there they were suddenly scoring a goal at Wembley. And I love that. The early rounds of our FA Cup, if you get a non-league team, smaller even than those two teams we just saw, and you go and watch them train on a Tuesday night and they've all arrived from work, the postman has to get up and deliver the letters at 5 o'clock in the morning. And there he is having his moment. And those, to me, those are the great human stories. And that Barrow story was a beautiful human story.
Does it give you goosebumps knowing that you are living now in the legend of that person's life, because he's going to play that for his grandchildren, and that's going to be, and your voice is connected to that for the history of that?
There is some of that. That sounds very self.
Have you sent him a bill? Is what he's asking.
I wouldn't want to, in any sense, lay claim to his moment. He scored the goal. I didn't score the goal. I happened to be the bloke who had a microphone in his hand and was shouting at the time. But Mike said earlier in this conversation around that game, you wouldn't have heard of this game or these teams if you weren't a Barrow supporter or a Stevenage supporter. And he's right. And the point is that game was for Barrow supporters and Stevenage supporters. Mm-hmm. That's who it was for. This was their day of days. And so I feel a greater responsibility around that game for them to get it absolutely right and give them the full package than in a way you do around Arsenal against Manchester United. Because if Arsenal-Manchester United goes wrong or is boring or, whatever, it just isn't great, well, there'll be another Arsenal-Manchester United in 4 months' time, and we'll try again. That is a never-to-be-repeated day. Yeah, and so I think there is a real weight of responsibility around occasions like that.
And that's why I saved it for last, because I think we share the same desire for the emotion and looking at what it means to the players. Far too often today, it doesn't mean as much as it should to certain players in certain matches. But there's no doubt in that one, and that really you were able to channel the emotion to that perfectly. And 11 years later, it's still being talked about as being a fantastic day. I'm just loving it. I absolutely love it. There was a point I was going to make and I completely forgot already. But any other games that you can think of that we haven't covered that just really were truly amazing, that you enjoyed? I mean, whether a big match, a match like the FA Trophy. I mean, anything else that we haven't that Mike, come to mind as being one of your favorites of all time?
My favorite football match of all time, I obviously get asked this, if I'm absolutely, in terms of my professional life, I mean, there's nothing like watching my sons play football, but they were never going to be professionals. But my favorite of all time, professionally speaking, was the opening game of the World Cup in 2010 in South Africa. Shabalala, yeah. Because of the resonance of that game. And I have to be very careful, because that is the game that puts the hairs up on the back of my neck and makes me well up and feel emotional. And I don't want to come over as all saintly or whatever, but if the world could bottle the sentiment that exists around that game of black and white Africans arm in arm walking to the stadium in absolute unity and in peace and smiling and living in sport the way sport is meant to be lived in, if the world could vaccinate itself with the mood of that day, the world would be a better place. And when a young boy who'd grown up underneath a corrugated iron roof in Soweto scored the first goal of that World Cup, it felt to me the most important goal there'd ever been. And it just spoke in a way only sport can and politics never can. So much hot air, but one swipe of a wonderful right foot, and it was like he'd made a point. It was beautiful.
And you were done the favor of having the player who scored it have such a poetic name himself.
Oh, correct. What a wonderful name.
How does that? I mean, between Bafana and Shabalala, I mean, you didn't have to do that much work to get a classic there.
And it was a great goal. It wasn't even a scrappy goal. It was a great goal. So God bless him. Funnily enough, on South African radio last year, it was 10 years since that goal, and on the anniversary on South African radio, they got me on with him, and which was lovely. And what a lovely guy he is, And of course, his legend was made by that moment, and he's a beautifully modest guy. And I did say to him, I said, "Thank you for your name, because if you can't make Shabalala sound good, you shouldn't be in the job."
Yeah, I mean, like that would have been awful if it was like scored by a guy like Feinberg, which is my last name. Like that, it would have completely ruined the entire World Cup. Which, by the way, I'm one of the few people that actually loved the Vuvuzelas. I thought it was local football culture, and the sound might have been annoying, but it was like it just added to it for me. And so many people were like, "Oh, I can't watch these games," I then you must not like football enough because
it never bothered me. I must say, I agree with you. They made it authentically an African World Cup. Fantastic. Yeah.
Yep. You don't want it cleansed and whatever we're about to see, I think, in the next couple of years. User questions. Do you have another 5 or 10 minutes? I'd love to get some of these questions answered from the chat room. What are your most? We have a tournament to determine this every year, but for you, what are your most and least favorite football phrases? And I'll leave the definition to what that is specifically vague, so that you can.
I'm going to offend you now. Sorry, Arsenal folk, but you are part of the reason why, and you won't like the reason why. I hate the expression in English football when I hear journalists, commentators, players, managers talk about the big six. Who decides who the big six are? Now, with the greatest respect, and I've said this, Arsenal
used to be the big four.
Clubs. Well, listen, people talk about the results teams got against the big six last season. Now, God bless Arsenal, but you might be one of the big six, but you weren't one of the top six last season. It was better last season to beat Wolves and Leicester than it was to beat Arsenal. So why are we having this category called the big six? It's nonsense. It's like some artificial invention of a category of teams.
I think it's a media invention to try to maintain the interest of people whose teams are taking a vacation for a few years from their normal spot. I mean,
it makes me laugh when they say record against the top six, because the top six is always changing. So how are you saying,
exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if I was a Leicester City supporter now and they're talking about the big six, I'm laughing. I mean, this is rubbish. This is rubbish. But Leicester aren't one of them. And yet they're the third best team in the land. It's madness. But there you are. So I've given you a list.
There's so many to choose from, but just all right. So we're not going to get the best at it.
Best. Best. I don't know. I'm struggling, Mike. I'm sorry. Best football phrase.
You can come back to it, or on your next broadcast, we'll just, whatever the first goal is scored, whatever you use, we'll assume is a direct response to the question that we got from who was it from Arjit? So Daniel Robert says, with no fans in the stadium, do you have to make sure not to breathe really heavily in the microphone or any other background sounds that would not usually be heard with fans in the stadiums? It's an interesting.
It's a good question from Daniel. Funny enough, I do listen to others on the television and hear myself, and you can hear you breathing, and it sounds really weird. So although I haven't really taken any steps to avoid it, I wish it wasn't there. And the absence of fans has made a big difference to the mood around commentating. You know, you feel like a soloist whose backing group has sort of crept out the back and has left you alone and hopelessly exposed. You know, why are you shouting? The reason you shouted in the first place when a goal went in was because 40,000 other people were shouting, and they're not, you know, and so it feels weird. And goodness me, if we've learned one thing over the last year, it's how much we should respect and look after the supporters, because the game without the supporters is just, at the moment, we're papering over cracks. We're doing okay because the narrative's interesting and people are dealing. Hey,
that's how we do it.
But it's just not the same. And my goodness, we are just thirsting to have the supporters back.
Yeah, Pockets of Space is one of my favorite ones as well.
Yeah.
You go and watch. You go to an ice hockey game with Andy and I both love ice hockey in Denver and here in Washington D.C. You go to an ice hockey game. No one's talking about pockets of space. Okay? I mean, there are hockey specific phrases, so that's probably actually an interesting example, because the traditional Canadian there's a whole parlance of hockey as well, but football, man, it's the best. I think the last one that we'll have is from Daniel Robert, and I can't confirm this, but Daniel wouldn't ask this if it wasn't true. Fabianski used to play at Arsenal, and he was kind of known as spilling some balls sometimes, and called him, we would call him Flappy Hansky or Flap. But apparently Martin Tyler said that the other day when talking about him, and do you have the free reign to kind of? I mean, I don't really know how best to answer the question, but was that something that you would do, or is that something
listen, what I would say is that you'll understand, I'm sure Daniel would, I'm certainly not going to say anything detrimental about my friend and colleague Martin Tyler.
I probably should have thought about that before I brought that up.
And I can only believe that if he said that, he would have said it in a context which was absolutely reasonable. Probably perhaps at his own expense, certainly not at Fabianski's expense. And beyond that, I don't know, because I didn't hear it. But evidently, he has got away with it, because as far as I know, he's still in a job.
Well, yeah, I don't think anyone should suggest he would be cancelled over that. But
listen, I take Daniel's point. It's a fair question, but I'm sorry I can't answer it satisfactorily, because I suspect it's an answer you could only give in the knowledge of the full context.
Right. And Martin being the only remaining FIFA video game announcer of the four that we haven't had on yet, we count on referrals. So we don't want to. I probably should have left that question in the chat, but in any case, thank you, chat, for joining us. We've got a lot of great people in here. Some names that I don't recognize from previous shows, which I love to see. New people coming in. We know why that is. It's not Andy and I, but Peter. It's been an honor and a pleasure to talk with you. I regularly there's really only two people that I search they announce who's going to be broadcasting all the games in advance, and I look to see where Lee Dixon's going to be, but you can almost guess that based on whatever the number one game is from a team playing standpoint, and then I look to see where you're going to be, because it's a pleasure to listen, and you paint the game in a way that makes it, that just makes it whole. It's not, you're not taking it from 50% to 100%, but the fact that you take it from 97 to 100 sometimes is exactly what's needed, and we love that. So, Andy, anything else you want to? Sorry,
no. Andy. Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say thank you to you.
No, I was going to say you are a legend, and we love you, and I hope you will come back and have a more football-oriented chat more than the life of Peter. And I have one question for you, because it's a debate topic. Who was your man of the match yesterday?
Oh, goodness me. I would after 32 minutes, it was Jesse Lingard.
Yeah.
I would say by the end, the bloke who caught my eye was Ødegaard. Yeah. But listen, that is without any deep thought about it, to be perfectly honest. And it's an honest answer in the sense that he's the one who caught my eye. You know, a bit more deep thought, I might come up with someone else, but I thought he was lovely on the ball, so I'll give you him.
Oh, he was brilliant. He was brilliant yesterday.
He's brilliant. He's pricing himself out of an Arsenal move at the moment, but you know. So, any case, thanks again, Peter, for joining us. Are you doing any work over the international break, or do you?
To be honest, I have promised myself and my wife that I will speak to her in the next 11 or 12 days. So the weekend after next is my next working weekend. So
beautiful. Any Arsenal games coming up that are on your diary, or?
Funnily enough, domestically for BT Sport in this country, I've just been asked to do the 2 legs of Arsenal's Europa League tie against.
Oh, perfect.
Prague. So
well, we're there. I don't know if this is breaking news, but there may not be 2 legs because they're just saying that Slavia might be eliminated from the competition. Yeah, someone just threw into a WhatsApp group, but then they're saying that they're either going to go to the next coefficient, the highest coefficient, which would be Spurs, or they're saying or they're saying maybe Rangers will get the move forward because they were technically in that tie, but.
If it goes to Spurs, not even just because of Arsenal Spurs, but you take a random draw and then you make it non-random by giving us the worst possible opponent that we could have that happened not to get through the last round. Oh boy, stay tuned for that. I had not heard that yet.
And again, this is all coming through like rumors, but there's a serious
coming through some guy named Fredo in a
it's actually from. It's actually from Miami John, so.
Oh, okay. Well, you know.
Yeah, but who knows?
All right.
So either way, Peter, you're gonna have some good matches to
it sounds like, or no match at all.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, then they'll move you up because you have the highest coefficient of any announcers. They'll move you up to whatever the next best one's going to be. All right. Well, thanks again for watching. Thanks again, Peter, for joining us. Absolute pleasure. And come on, you Gooners.